thinks that without them, God must wait to learn what it is that we free creatures will freely do. The simple foreknowledge person denies this. My project here is, let's suppose that absolute complete foreknowledge is consistent with our being genuinely free and with libertarian as a theory of what freedom requires. And then let's see what follows from that. And if you are an advocate of simple foreknowledge. And advocates of simple foreknowledge sometimes say that their view gives them certain providential advantages over the open theist. And open theists often say, no, it doesn't. I think there's a little bit of truth to the idea that, to the claim that it does provide some advantages, but I think not much. So that's where we're headed. Section 2, what did God know and when did he know it? Let's pretend that our freedom then is not incompatible with the mere existence of complete foreknowledge or timeless knowledge, although I think a lot of what I say would apply to timeless knowledge, but I'm going to largely ignore that. Knowledge possessed by an essentially omniscient knower. Let's stick to the case of actual foreknowledge, setting timeless knowledge aside. Molinism is important to libertarian theists because even complete foreknowledge without knowledge of conditionals of freedom leads to a view of providence in which God must take some risks. God must make decisions to create this or that before knowing exactly what the outcome will be. That is, his foreknowledge of the outcome cannot figure in his reasons for allowing the circumstances that will lead to that outcome. Such foreknowledge is providentially useless, at least with respect to the question of whether to allow those circumstances. I'm going to skip here for a bit, and I won't be reading from the paper for a while. Now, a lot of people have raised different problems for God's having complete foreknowledge of everything from the end to the beginning. Some have said God couldn't be a rational agent choosing to act for reasons if God has always had complete foreknowledge, including knowledge of what God himself would choose. The idea has been that you can't know what you'll do and still choose or deliberate about whether to do it. It's too late. If you know what you're going to do, it's too late to deliberate about it or choose. And this sort of, so complete foreknowledge would sort of rob God of rational agency. I'm not going to press this sort of objection. I don't think, it doesn't seem to me to be too difficult to resist. Compare God with complete foreknowledge to a time traveler, a sort of fanatical one who's videotaped himself in his life up to the point where he gets in the time machine and takes the tapes with him and goes back in time. And he's been taping his older self, sort of tracking his older self, the one that traveled backwards in time. And that guy then has copies of the videotapes that he made of himself earlier in his personal time, as Lewis would say. So he's got all this information. If he forgets anything, he can look at the videotape. It's easy to think, oh wow, if that were the case, he would always know what he's going to do at every juncture after he's traveled back in time. He wouldn't be able to deliberate or decide what to do or act for reasons. He would just have to do what he knew that he was going to do. It's not entirely clear that it might be weird, but it's not entirely clear that such a time traveler couldn't act for good reasons. That he could say to himself, yes, I know exactly what I'm going to do in every situation, but I'm just going to live in the moment and sort of kind of put that in the back of my mind, kind of bracket it off, even though I know it. So I'm saving the drowning child because I care about the child, not because I saw it already on the videotape, and I know that that's what I'm going to do. So it's not so clear that you can't have this kind of knowledge and yet act for reasons and perhaps even deliberate, although that's a little stranger. But weird circles can easily appear for such a time traveler. So compare a time traveler who comes from a post-apocalyptic future, kind of like the one in the Mad Max movies, let's say. suppose it's me, and as it turns out, I'm the guy who, after I've traveled back in time, pushed the button and caused the nuclear holocaust that leads to the Mad Max-style world. If I do it, if I push the button because it's always been my settled intention to live like Mad Max, that's been my goal, and this is just my way of bringing it about, there's an explanation of why this Holocaust occurs and why everybody's living in the desert in Australia. Well, on the other hand, if I do it because I think, I've come from the future, and I know that there's going to be a nuclear holocaust. If I think to myself, well, there's going to be one, and it'll either be some old Russian material that gets used to blow us up, or it'll be us blowing them up. Might as well be us, and I push the button. And as a matter of fact, there's no old Soviet weapons waiting to cause the Holocaust if I don't do it. Then you have this weird, circle, like in these sort of paradoxical time travel movies. Consistent, but there's no explanation for why the Holocaust occurs. Well, when you have explanatory loops like that, you have sort of no explanation for the whole loop. And to the extent that God acts for reasons that involve loops of that kind, God is left making choices that God can't really explain. So I think all the people involved in this debate who want God to have complete foreknowledge allow that God cannot use every bit of everything that he knows about the future as part of his reasons for each creative decision that God makes. God has to bracket some of what he knows or purge the divine foreknowledge of some of what God knows for the purposes of explaining some of God's choices. Now, this is all very figurative, the bracketing and the purging, and it's not temporal. But it must be possible to sort of sort out what God knows and figure out which bits of it are relevant to which decisions. And none of this is meant to imply that God does more than one act, makes more than one choice, but certainly God's creative choice has lots and lots of ramifications. And some of what God knows is relevant to some of those ramifications, but not others. Provides God with a reason for doing some of the things, making some of these things to be the case. All right, so let's skip on to principles governing stages. It's the 5th page. The possibility of God's bracketing off some of what he foreknows, the possibility of distinguishing earlier and later stages in the mind of God, is crucial to the viability of complete foreknowledge. At least so long as God is conceived as a supremely rational agent who can explain his choices in terms of his own good reasons. The defenders of foreknowledge generally posit a relation of explanatory priority holding among the things that God knows for roughly these sorts of reasons. No, you can't have explanatory loops and have God really explaining why he does things. Molinists have been particularly eager to do so. Indeed, Molinism acquired its other name, middle knowledge, from Molina's contention that knowledge of these CFs was prior in the explanatory order to God's knowledge of future contingent facts, but posterior in some sense to knowledge of necessary truths. I'm going to try to articulate some principles that I hope won't be too controversial about the ordering of God's foreknowledge relative to the creative choices. Here are some of the questions about explanatory priority and bracketing off that need answers. What is it for a set of true propositions S to constitute a stage in God's knowledge? What does it mean to say that a proposition P is not yet settled or not yet true when some other proposition Q is settled or already true? What principles govern at an earlier stage then? I'm going to assume that each divine choice makes a cut. Sometimes the same cut that is made by a bunch of other choices, though perhaps sometimes not. So some choices will be the sole choice or largest choice at a given juncture. I'll assume that there aren't stages that are incommensurable, that share only proper subsets. There might be some use for that idea. I shall assume that